face are on the money in Honduras. In terms of living on the land, it's a subsistence culture largely. They have their milpas, which is a common term for a corn and bean field where you grow your food, squash, and some other crops are grown, and chicken. They do have some livestock, but milk and chicken and eggs are probably their primary sources of protein. And there are some areas nearby where lumber and coffee are harvested. Workers are migrating, spread of electricity. The nearest hospital is about 4 hours away. I'm going to be moving a little faster through some of this. This is what it looks like from the clinic that has been set up down there. It's about 400 families in the center of this area. There's about 20 to 25 surrounding villages. Many without road access. People have to walk for many hours to get to the doctor, these kinds of things. And focusing on women, you can see some of the characteristics of most women in the community and the kinds of construction that some of the houses involve. High infant mortality and lifetime fertility, limited access to healthcare. And this was a Pacific-facing community until the war. And with U.S. funds, they built a bridge that connected Honduras to this community. It was extremely rural. It was a 14-hour trip por bestia, as they would say, by beast before, and now it's a 4-hour ride. And this has opened up this part of the country to people like Jeff Heck, who went down and found a community in great need and has really set up a nice program there. So I'm putting these together, and I want to point out that I think susto can cause nervios. This is part of the local explanatory model, and that nervios and susto are associated with ataques. The symptom cluster that we saw in Honduras, and it's very common. As I mentioned, Christy O'Day, the doctor down there, she sees these all the time. And at every visit that I've been down there, we've seen a case of this, and they're all very interesting and unique and odd. I mean, they just force interpretation. Pseudoseizures, unconsciousness, catalepsy, which again is a kind of stiffness or motor inhibition, rigidity, mutism, and or insensitivity to pain are very common. It's a very internalized, trance-like psychomotor retardation state. It can last anywhere from a few minutes to a few days. So the first case, Victor, 19-year-old male, 6th grade education, lived with his parents and 3 siblings. One of them was married 2 to 3 days earlier. So a lot of action going on in the family. Small for his age and blind in one eye due to a childhood infection. Extended family nearby. He was brought to the clinic by our field clinic there. So I was in the main clinic when he came in the evening, where he was accompanied by his parents. He had medically unexplained paralysis, and by apparent report, unconsciousness for the previous 15 hours during which no movement, talking, or eating. He was cleared. It's medically unexplained. We can't find any neurological problems, any metabolic or other things. Well, let's let the psychiatrist take care of it. I was working with a psychiatrist down there and really trying to get mental health on their agenda. So we worked with this young man. Mother explains that he has nerves. So we're getting explanatory models here. Because he's weak and deadly, he cannot control his angers or fears. He'd suffered a similar episode about 2 years earlier, which lasted for 4 days, if you can imagine. And in fact, the Western literature on conversion often talks about, well, how do people go to the bathroom as well? That's part of the problem of this illness, is that they do, and they just, you have to clean it up. He was brought to the clinic at that point and given a vitamin injection, which is the standard cure that people want for this and for stress in general and nerves in general. Remained anxious and guarded. The family later consulted a Salvadoran curandero. This healer attributed the condition to evil spirits who paralyze his body when he becomes scared or angry. So it's an interesting kind of metaphor that involves emotion here. He was prescribed an herbal tonic for a year. His father agrees with the curandero and thinks his son was accosted by evil duendes and then suffered a susto prior to his first paralysis. And when he goes near the place where he was accosted, it's what causes or triggers subsequent situations, he thinks. Both parents agreed in this case that vitamins are needed. This particular case was precipitated by a false accusation against him and a threat of violence from his new brother-in-law, a bolo or a drunk, who now lives in Victor's household. The newlywed brother-in-law became angry when accused of infidelity, and this is 2 days into his marriage, mind you. Assumed Victor was the source and threatened him. Victor's around the house a lot, so he could have seen whatever it was that was allegedly going on. But he was accused of something he never saw or said. He became angry and paralyzed outside his home after retreating. And this is, at this point, where our field clinic was called because they were in this small community, and someone came and said, hey, my brother has not been moving for a couple days, or for a couple hours, we want to have him seen. They brought him down to the clinic, and after about an hour or two, it was very hard to understand the parents. It took a long time to get the story. We went back and talked to him, and he worked his way out of it. But it was a very rainy night. They had to stay in the shelter for a while, and then they ended up walking home, which was probably about a 4-hour walk. So it was very disruptive for them. Oops. I'm linking ataques and nervios and susto together because I think in the local ethnopsychology they fit. Wanting to scream or to cry or feeling pain or tingling in parts of the body or a sense of being physically overcome by emotion were all commonly described when people talked about nervios. So this is some of Maria's work. These were interviews that I had conducted a few years earlier, and I was interested in understanding, is it depression or is it something else? For a lot of people that came into the clinic, we were trying to see what kinds of mental illnesses and disorders they were suffering from. And we heard a lot about nervios. So you can see this sense of becoming overwhelmed by an emotion. This is another example. I'm worried about the economic situation at home. I'm feeling sad, I'm motivated, sad because of problems with my husband. He's cheating, I can't sleep, I'm worried, I get nerves when I have to confront him. I feel like I'm going to scream and throw and hit things. I feel like my body is becoming larger. And you can almost kind of see how in this community that is not allowed and you go the opposite direction. And in this community there's considerable domestic violence, alcoholism. These are homes that are isolated from each other to a large degree, and what happens there, not many people know about. So you could see maybe some of the reasons for eating taking a certain form. I feel bad in my body, down, weak, without energy, any desire to work, weak and dizzy, blurred vision, sounds a little like depression. I feel a terrible thing in my heart, agitated, and trembling overcomes me. I feel tired, I'm crying, I have a headache. So these are a lot of symptoms you see in the clinic, headaches and these kinds of things that really use up a lot of physician time. And here we can see the nerve-susto connection. I have nerves. I have, ever since I was bitten by an animal, which she describes as a major susto, I see little things as big things, and I would cry, couldn't walk or anything. So, it gets so bad that they can't walk. There's motor disturbance associated with this. I've been in treatment for the last 8 months, and I get nerves and become tense. Everything hurts my head. So I'm going the wrong way. And then finally, for this group, categories of susto-vulnerable populations are described largely along moralistic lines. Persons who on account of behavior or disadvantaged status might be exposed to malevolent influences are those who are vulnerable to susto. Sinners, drunks, morally vulnerable, and needing protection, women and children in some circumstances, and the sick. I mean, this boy with bad eye and a slightly smaller stature, it was, it wasn't the same. It could be considered sick in that culture. So that's case one. And that is the internalized, paralytic form of this. The other cases occurred in a community called Arandak, which is where Dr. Coster did his research, dissertation research, and it's on a tributary of the Cocoa River, which you can see more or less represented there. And upstream from this, there's very little settlement, so they're kind of at the end of the road as far as settlements up the river. Mosquito peoples in the Mosquito Coast were historically decentralized tribal and linguistic groups, both colonial and pre-colonial. There's a lot of debate about political structure and leadership and things during the colonial period, but they appear to have been there for a while in a certain relationship with the other tribes. They became key intermediaries when the British buccaneers and merchants came in, and they really were intermediaries between the Sumo and the Mayanga and the British, because the Mayanga had the access to the natural resources, and then the Mosquito acted as intermediaries, and that gave them some power, but they had to keep everybody happy. Hunting, communal labor, economy, individual pursuits are also encouraged. I mean, people go out and find jobs, they go to work at different jobs at different times of the year. Men leave the community much more often than women. Women are a little bit trapped in the community, it seems to me. Village headmen and council elders, this is from the literature. I don't know if this is the case in your community. The area has a Catholic and Moravian influence. It's increasingly Catholic. The Spanish were not in this part of the country. The Moravians who came in and spread the gospel here. And so there's a number of different languages spoken and different ways of communicating, some of which get used when the people are in these states. Arandak, very quickly. It's a very small community, 40 households, the surrounding lands are cleared and planted.